Our history is no more than a series of incredible events. Each one of us can influence its course. From the birth of a 1,000-year empire to the end of a flourishing civilization. From the creative genius of a handful of men to a global cultural revolution. From the darkest totalitarian visions to the most terrifying great wars. From the heroic resistance of an entire people to the unbreakable will of a minority. The tiniest of our decisions can influence the future of mankind. To know the past is to anticipate the future. 2025, 1:59 p.m., Museum of Natural History, London. A delivery driver has just parked at the bottom of the steps. This is a special day and security is high. An important scientific conference to debate the origin of man is due to take place at 2 o'clock. For the last 150 years, the world has been divided. Evolutionists on one side, creationists on the other. Divided by different visions of man's place in the world, the two parties have become radicalized. On either side, extremists are fanning the flames of civil war. Overwhelmed by events, states seem incapable of stopping the slide. The world is on the verge of total war. But none of this ever happened. 150 years ago, a tiny grain of sand will send one man to the other side of the globe and change our perception of the world. '19th century England. A little boy is running frantically to get to school on time. His name is Charles Darwin. December 27th, 1831. Darwin, now aged 22, boards the Beagle, a Royal Naval vessel. 1859, London. Customers in a bookshop jostle for copies of On the Origin of Species, his most famous book. These three intimately connected events will lead to the development and then to the spread of the theory of evolution, which will turn our way of seeing the world upside down. Our story takes place in the 19th century, in a world that is changing fast. Invented just a few decades earlier, the steam engine is about to take humanity into a new era. Free of the Napoleonic Wars, the United Kingdom sends its ships out to conquer the world. This is the age of steam engines, of industrialization, and great scientific discoveries. At the beginning of the century, the United Kingdom is a prosperous country of 16 million inhabitants. Cut off from the continent by the Channel, the island has long banked upon its fleet. The Royal Navy is synonymous with prestige and power. In the following century, 1 in 4 of the Earth's people will be a subject of the British Empire. The power of the United Kingdom is unrivaled. The inventor of the steam engine, the country is sacrificing its agriculture and staking everything on coal and industry. The England of the 19th century is teeming with scientists, writers, architects, and free thinkers. In London, people are passionate about the new sciences such as paleontology, the first steamships, or the huge metallic structures of suspension bridges. The English scientists are aware they are living through a unique moment. The Victorian age is a veritable explosion of knowledge, and everybody wants to play a part.
Welcome to the memory of humanity. Here we can control time, analyze and compare billions of events, and alter them to rewrite history endlessly. Our contemporary creations, from the cell phone to artificial hearts, are the distant descendants of generations of inventions. Let's go back in time to 5,000 years ago. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians invent a counting system based not on 10 units, but on 60. Our minutes and seconds have just been born. A little later, Egypt divides the year into 12 months, or 365 days, each of 24 hours. The Phoenicians create the alphabet, later taken up by the Greeks, who themselves will discover major mathematical theorems and invent democracy, while Indians will discover the zero and the numerals, unfairly known as Arabic. And we are still centuries before our age. From Roman aqueducts to the Müller viaduct, only a tiny part of the techniques is really invented. The major part of the road was already traveled. This massive sum of knowledge constitutes a heritage, a treasure, belonging to civilization. Without it, we would have to reinvent the wheel at every generation. Not to lose it seems an absolute priority.
Accumulating knowledge by learning by rote. That is exactly what the young Charles Darwin has problems with. Born in 1809 in England, he is the fifth child of a doctor with great aspirations for his son, that he follows the same path as his father. However, Charles is much more interested in the world around him than in school. Often late, he describes himself later as a simple little dullard. His teachers think the same. And yet his difficulties at school have nothing to do with his ability. He is quite simply made for other things. He carries out chemistry experiments after setting up a tiny secret laboratory in the shed at the bottom of the family garden. Neglects his studies to collect marine samples at low tide and then study them with a makeshift microscope. Learns taxidermy from a former slave who tells him fabulous stories about tropical forests. Collects rare beetles and classifies them by species. Crosses the country in a straight line off the beaten track by using a compass to discover fabulous spots that are still wild. His thirst for discovery is insatiable. The world is too rich for him to spend his time on a school bench reading Greek classics. So he doesn't hurry his studies. He knows that his father will pay whatever is necessary for his son to become a doctor, largely sufficient to give Darwin the time to slake his thirst for scientific experiments and discoveries. Until his father realizes his ploy and suggests that Darwin enter the church.
Everyone is unique. Human beings are all different. We all react to events in our own way, love specific things. School cannot adapt to everyone. It is forced to offer an education suited to the greatest number. On the scale of a country, case by case proves complicated. Thus, a pupil achieving poor results may well attribute them to a lack of work, but it may also be that he is simply made for different teaching. Darwin is far from being an isolated case. Albert Einstein, who developed the theory of relativity, wasn't always a good student. The same goes for Balzac, Churchill, Thomas Edison, or John Lennon. When Darwin carries out his own chemistry experiments in his makeshift laboratory, or when he conscientiously classifies his beetles, he is showing proof of real scientific reflection, observation, hypothesis, experimentation, data gathering, comparison of results, deduction. He is unable to limit himself to one science. His thirst drives him to delve into a whole range of fields. This will be his strength. For Darwin, it is not about learning or even less believing, but about observing and wondering.
It is at this pivotal moment in his life that he receives a letter from his teacher and mentor. In the letter, he suggests that he leave England for 2 years, join a ship as a volunteer naturalist, and set off to the other side of the world to map the coastlines. Nothing more, nothing less. Darwin is excited, but immediately comes up against his father's refusal. He only sees this as yet another excuse not to study. However, his uncle will take the young man's side with a weighty argument. At least Darwin will cost a lot less money. And so, on December 27, 1831, at 2 p.m., the Beagle, His Majesty's exploration vessel, sails from the port of Plymouth with Charles Darwin aboard. After a long crossing, the ship arrives within sight of Brazil. This is the first stage of a huge voyage during which the young naturalist will seize every opportunity to go ashore and explore the hinterland. He braves the sticky heat to the Brazilian pampas to collect insect specimens, digs up fossils of prehistoric mammals in Uruguay, suffers the cold of Tierra del Fuego, and storms of Cape Horn. He is amazed to discover animals surviving in the muddy waters of Argentina's salt lakes, endures thirst for hours on end as he observes armadillos, ostriches, and lizards. Then, on September 15th, 1835, the Beagle sails within the sight of the mythical Galapagos. These volcanic islands lost in the middle of the Pacific Ocean provide a formidable laboratory for Darwin. Not content with just being able to observe closely animals that are unique in the world, he notices that on each island, different bird populations, even though from the same species, present particular characteristics as if isolated from each other. They had become new branches, new animals. This tiny observation is fundamental and will be the basis of all his reflection. And yet, all these discoveries almost never came about. Let's now go back several years. Darwin applies for the post of naturalist. However, the captain of the Beagle studies him and decides from the shape of his nose that the young man lacks determination. Aware that he will spend long months in the young man's company, the captain refuses to have him on board. Fortunately for Darwin, and for the rest of the world, the captain finally changes his mind.
We have just reached a turning point. A turning point is a key event, a crossroads in our history where the world swings one way or the other. The captain of the Beagle at first refused Darwin because of a physical feature. Let's have a little fun imagining what could have happened if he had stuck to his original position. For Darwin, it's easy. He would have returned home, and his father would have made him go into the church. One thing is certain, Darwin would never have gathered sufficient observations to develop his theory, and even less gain the prestige necessary to defend it. For the rest of the world, it's another story. Darwin is the father of the theory of evolution, but he is not the only one to have had intuitions about it. Despite everything, the idea would have come to light, but certainly not in the same way. Based on hypothesis and not on direct observation, It would probably have been contested in a much more effective way, and very quickly the population would have split into pro and anti-evolution, perhaps even to the point of creating a real crisis in the United Kingdom. More conservative countries like the United States would have defended the old beliefs, while others, more liberal, such as Germany, would have become evolutionist. Our contemporary society would have been marked by this split. The radical opposition between creationists and evolutionists would have seemed like a veritable war of religion. You can never underestimate the power of ideas.
On October 2nd, 1836, after a voyage lasting 4 years, 9 months, and 5 days, the Beagle finally returns home. What Darwin doesn't know is that in his absence, his former teacher has conscientiously made his discoveries known. So Darwin returns to the United Kingdom with an already established celebrity. It will be useful to him. He brings with him hundreds of samples, whole books crammed with precious notes and an idea, an intuition. Relying on his accumulated experience, Darwin reflects, cross-checks, analyzes, takes the time to be sure, and will do so over many years before he publishes anything on the subject. Why all these precautions? Because his theory is revolutionary. It can be summed up thus: living beings are in perpetual evolution. From one generation to another, parents transmit certain physical attributes to their children. For example, a tall man has a good chance of having tall children. From one generation to the next, our children change. They evolve. In nature, certain of these attributes can prove to be useful, useless, or even a handicap. A taller child will be able to pick fruit from the higher branches of a tree, but, on the other hand, will be seriously handicapped when hiding from predators. Thus, the environment will favor the survival and, therefore, the reproduction of individuals possessing appropriate attributes, and inversely for the others. Life adapts by evolving. In 1859, 20 years after his voyage on the Beagle, Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species. Very quickly, it attracts opposition. The principal criticism made against it is that it questions the model that has existed for 2,000 years, that of the Bible and Genesis. According to Christian religion, God created the earth and all living things upon it. He made man in his own image, the one he has today without any change since his origin. God created the world, and therefore the world is good, which does not fit in at all with a natural selection that is merciless, tarnishing the image of a harmonious nature, and even less with the notion of evolution itself. This is a veritable earthquake for traditional Christian thinking.
Ideas are powerful. This statement is so true that in every age, the powers that be have distrusted them. Let's return to the ancient world, to the place where philosophy and democracy began. Socrates was put on trial and then executed for, amongst other things, corrupting youth. The philosopher could not stop himself from asking awkward questions, the ones the powers did not want to hear. Centuries later, Galileo is the subject of a sensational trial. The scholar claims that the Earth orbits around the Sun, and not the opposite. Today we know that he was absolutely correct. Like Darwin, he has a theory based on scientific evidence. Like Darwin's, it runs against the Christian vision. He has many supporters within the clergy, including the Pope. However, being right is not enough, and Galileo will underestimate one thing. To admit that one is wrong, and has been for centuries, is never easy. So while the clergy is happy to allow the two explanations to exist side by side, which would spare the egos of the traditionalists, Galileo insists and criticizes them in public. The result is a trial from which he emerges the loser. Great religions are by nature conservative. They are like huge ships that cannot easily change course. They need time. Darwin knows this and will prove to be patient and wise. For example, the principle of evolution is at the heart of his theory, but the word does not appear once in his text. He takes care to treat the work of his predecessors respectfully. Darwin knows how to learn from the mistakes of the past.
The first edition of On the Origin of Species sells out in a single day. More have to be printed. In the end, there are no less than 6 editions, corrected and completed by Darwin, who reacts to the attacks and the criticism through his book. Intelligently, he adapts his work, down to its final touch. He takes no part in sterile debates, in the jousting between partisans and opponents. He keeps well away from the fray. The strength of the book lies in its reasonable size, which makes it accessible to the widest readership and not just to experts. In 1869, despite strong opposition, Darwin's theory is finally accepted by the majority of the scientific world. The first battle is won by the evolutionists, but the war of ideas is only just beginning. In reaction, a new opposition movement is born at the end of the century in the United States among evangelist circles, creationism, which is based not on scientific study, but on a literal reading of the Bible, defends the idea that God is creator of all. Certain sections of the movement even go so far as to state that the Earth was created 6,000 years ago, and that the fossils found are artifacts placed here and there by God in order to deceive the human mind. With several million copies printed, the Fundamentals is a founding text of creationist thought. It is the origin of the word fundamentalist. In the United States, the legal battle is begun. And in 1925, the creationists managed to ban the teaching of evolutionary theory in more than 15 out of the 48 states. The ban will not be lifted until 1970. In our day, the fight to impose the teaching of creationism in the most powerful country in the world is still raging. Adversaries of Darwin have never been more virulent or more powerful. But that is another story.
It is easier to destroy than to create. Darwin developed a theory that has been accepted by the scientific world. Today, it is being questioned and opposed. It could well see itself banned and then vanish. This has happened before. It will happen again. The fragility of our achievements can be observed every day. Take, for example, the recent destruction in the Middle East of historical evidence proving that other civilizations existed before Islam. By wiping out traces of the past, you finally wipe out memories. When the Mongols sack Baghdad, they burn a library containing 1 million manuscripts. What secrets of our history vanished that day? When we consider all the war and destruction the world has seen, it seems astonishing that we still have so much left. It so happens that, along their way, the destroyers of knowledge have always been met by their alter egos, people or institutions who have stepped in and who were able to defend these treasures. From the fall of the Roman Empire to the agony of the Mongol invasions, knowledge has been hidden away in churches, has found refuge with new empires, has continued to exist within the heart of other civilizations. To our own day, nobody has dropped the torch. Our history is filled with museum curators giving their lives to protect their collections, librarians braving all dangers to save manuscripts, resistance risking all to preserve a heritage. They gave their lives so that the world could continue to progress. Today, it is our turn to ensure the handover.